This is Counterpoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granick-Allen. Many governments in the first world, Canada included, provide foreign aid to developing nations with the hopes that this will provide better outcomes for people living there. We hope these funds go toward the basics, such as access to clean drinking water, education, and economic development. There has been growing concern, however, that this foreign aid oftentimes comes with strings attached, and typically in the form of advancing sexual and reproductive rights. And what do I mean by that? I mean that funding and access to abortion, contraception, and comprehensive sexual education. So what is the problem with this? Well, for some, there is no problem. Some advocates argue that these policies help lift people out of poverty. But according to some critics, these policies and implementation thereof boil down to a neo-colonialization of the developing world. And you can imagine the concern with that as we grapple with Canada's history vis-a-vis the Indigenous peoples. We're going to unpack this issue today, and joining me now to share her insights is Obianuju Ekeocha, a UK-based Nigerian biomedical scientist, president of Culture of Life Africa, and author of Target Africa, Ideological Neocolonialism in the 21st Century. Uju, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure, as I know you are very well versed in this subject matter, and a lot of Canadians don't know very much about this.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya, for having me on. I'm so grateful to get an opportunity to at least share what I have noticed and seen and learned over the years, really, with Canadian viewers, especially people who are curious about what the Canadian government is doing.
No, absolutely. And I think many of our viewers want to know what they're doing. So first, I used a very large term in my opener, and I'd like you to explain what is ideological neocolonialization?
Yeah, so I think it was a couple of years ago that this term kind of came on my radar, and I started trying to learn a bit more about it. Obviously, people know about colonialism that happened back in the early 20th century. So 1910, 2030s, Nigeria gained independence by 1960. So the colonialism is something that we around the world are conscious about. But neocolonialism is this idea, which is in fact, not unlike the real, the original colonialism, I should say, but in this case, it is Western countries, sometimes some of the same countries that were colonial masters, in a sense of speaking, coming back to the African continent and other parts of the world, the other parts of the developing world, bringing in this time around ideals and ideologies that don't belong to us and try, in their powerful way, trying to get us to adopt some of these ideas and ideals and ideologies. So we are talking about that as another colonization. We are talking about that as a kind of cultural imperialism because the African people have their own way of life already. So why do we have to accept what the West is giving us? But again, very much like the time, back in the early 20th century, we find ourselves being overpowered again by people who are stronger than us and richer than us and wealthier than us and, more powerful. And it's playing out all across the developing world, unfortunately.
Yes, again, another large phrase, cultural imperialism. This is a very interesting point and concept you bring up. Obviously we're a Canadian national news network, so we're very interested in Canada's role in that. We hear oftentimes that the US is this mega entity. It's this huge power, and they sort of determine the fate of the world, if you will. They control the levers of power. What is Canada's role in Africa?
At the moment. So Canada, we have experienced Canada, let's say even from my own personal point of view as growing up as a child back in Nigeria years and years ago, we always knew Canada as a nicer America. They are definitely not Britain, but they are not America, but they're somewhere in the middle. They are like Americans, but they're very nice, very kind, very humble, and they listen. So that had always been our experience of Canada as as a Western nation approaching an African country or the African continent on the whole, because this is kind of a shared experience across the board. But today we find that with some of the emerging cultures around the world, some of the emerging ideologies, especially when when it comes to things like sexual and reproductive health and rights, so-called comprehensive sexuality education. You alluded to them at the beginning, even abortion, and some of these very strong ideas that are coming from the West. We find that Canada, it has become a very loud voice.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there.
These ideologies.
I'm going to pause you there. We're going to cut a commercial and we'll be right back. Thank you.